Okay, I think the session is now being recorded. So, good afternoon again, everyone, and welcome to Social Science 100 Week 3. I hope you have had a restful week, and I hope you have had a chance to work on the readings, no, that I assigned for this meeting and from last week. So I do want to pick up uh, from our discussion last meeting. And if you would remember, we were talking about the notion of definition, right? And I shared with you basically a screenshot of a certain passage that I want us to take a look, no? Because this is the passage that we're sort of concerned with in terms of trying to understand what is required of a definition. So I'm going to share that passage again, and before we do anything else, I want us to look into that passage, and I want you to tell me how it is that you find the answer of Meno. So shares. Here we go. There, right? So if you would remember, ang pinag-uusapan natin dito ay basically the dialogue Meno, which was written by Plato, is about virtue, or basically whether virtue can be taught. That is the point of departure of the dialogue. And so at the beginning, Meno was asking Socrates, can virtue be taught? And of course, for those of you who are a bit familiar with Socrates, it is typical of his, character as portrayed by Plato to be very inquisitive. No? So in the mind of Socrates, before I answer what or whether virtue can be taught, we have to first make sure that we are on the same page, no, as to what virtue is. So with that in mind, a couple of exchanges later, Socrates would uh, Socrates would return the question to Meno, right? And he would return the question to Meno and ask, what do you yourself say virtue is? And so we find ourselves here. The answer of Meno, the one that I've shared with you and the one that I ask you to, ponder upon is this one. Again, I'll read it. Meno says, it is not hard to tell you, Socrates. First, if you want the virtue of a man, it is easy to say that a man's virtue consists of being able to manage public affairs, and in so doing, to benefit his friends and harm enemies, and to be careful that no harm comes to himself. If you want the virtue of a woman, it is not difficult to describe. She must manage the home well, preserve its possessions, and be submissive to her husband. The virtue of a child, whether male or female, is different again, and so is that of an elderly man. If you want that, or if you want that of a free man or a slave. And there are very many other virtues, so that one is not at a loss to say what virtue is. There is a virtue for every action and every age, for every task of ours and every one of us. And Socrates, the same is true for wickedness. So now that he has this answer, I would like us to talk about this particular answer, not the content. Remember, I already made some qualifications regarding the content of his answer. We're not particularly interested in the specific, the particulars of his answer, but we're more or less interested in the structure, in the form. So now I give the question to you. Now, if you were Socrates, imagine yourself as Socrates and you were the one who asked the definition of a virtue, then how it is that you would respond, or how would you find basically the answer of Meno? Anyone? How would you find the answer of Meno? Yes, Nika.
Hello po. Narinig po.
Yeah.
Sa akin po foremost, gusto ko munang i-praise na yung confidence and parang certainty ni Meno in the way he answered. And what I got from him is that to define virtue is like parang highly variable siya. It is determined by the
Sorry, what was that?
context. Um,
Highly variable, you mean?
Apo.
All right. Yeah.
Parang it is determined by the context, or in this case, yung person in question. Pero po, I don't think Meno's answer was able to provide the very definition of virtue. Kasi what I think he provided is that there are multiple forms of virtue by enumerating the specific instances, but they do not
Okay.
precisely point to virtue itself. Kasi
All right.
parang Meno offered the virtue of a woman, child, man, slave. But the point is, what does make them all virtue? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
kumbaga, parang ano bang tawag doon? Wala siyang encompassing na factor. And I think this challenges Meno's confidence and certainty. Yun po.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Nika. Before I respond to that, so sige, let us hear from Irish, and then was it Jubilee a while ago who had her hand raised? Jubileen?
Yes, sir. Yes po.
Yeah. So yeah, after Irish, Jubileen, and then Jazzer Rose.
Hello.
Yes.
So,
Hello.
for me po, the overall thought of Meno, parang nagre-reflect po siya sa social construct, and it's like they imposed and confined roles depending on what they think the capabilities or virtues of a person based on gender or actions or age po, mga ganun. And it's like you have to act or choose a role, and you have to live up to that role to embody a certain virtue or to reflect what's your identity overall. Yun lang po.
Okay. Thank you. Let's hear from Jubileen.
Good afternoon po, sir. I think
Good afternoon. Yeah.
I would agree po if I would be Socrates, and I'll be considering what Meno said, since he said that virtue is the same is true for wickedness. It's like the same for him, because wickedness and virtue was something of which humans beings were capable. We do moral we know virtue is morally good and wickedness is morally wrong. It's like I would agree to it, and he Menu answer it as Menu answer it as what that yung kanina pang sumagot na sinundan ko na maybe it's for some it's a like social construct or some, but people act out of self-interest po, kaya nasabi rin ni Meno, so I would gladly accept that if I were Socrates po, since we know what that virtue for him is like a set of rules. There is a set of rules. Sinabi niya rin po submissive yung yung mother niya or yung what they call wife sa nagsabi siya about about certain things what virtue is. So ayun lang po sa akin, parang I would gladly accept it since people act out of self-interest. Tas yun nga po, um, it was something which human beings were capable of. Yun lang po.
All right. Thank you. And then we hear from Jazzer Rose.
Good
Am I
afternoon, sir.
pronouncing that right? Yeah.
Jazer po, sir.
Jazer. Sorry. Yeah.
It's okay, sir.
Yes.
If I were Socrates po and asking for a definition on what virtue is, I would find yung answer po ni Mena na something na parang hindi siya concrete to what I'm expecting. Kasi I'm trying to see if we are on the same path po on what virtue is before answering yung question din po na yung parang natuturo po ba yung virtue. Kasi Mano points out po to several things and instances of what virtue is and failed to give a concrete definition of virtue, yung its common core or essence po ng virtue talaga. Yun lang po, sir.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, these are, very brilliant answers. I do want to comment on them briefly. Um, the answers of Irish and Jubilee, which are quite connected with each other. This is good because it points us to the nature of virtue insofar um, as it is a concept in philosophy, right? Let me clarify that. So what I mean is that their answer focuses on the content basically of virtue itself. And Irish made a very good point there, which is actually, for those of you who have, I think there's a subject called theories of justice, right? And I'm not sure if in that subject, students who have taken it would have studied Plato. But Plato's Republic, this is not the Republic, this is a different dialogue. But Plato has this ideal society, in which, it would be a successful, it would be an ideal society if each person were to stick with wearing his or her own hat, with wearing their own hat. Well, what does that mean? In a society, you have a particular role. You know, the best way for a society to function is for you to stick with that role. So, what do we mean by that? No, in the current setup, kung titingnan natin sa perspective ng Philippine context, Manny Pacquiao as a boxer would effectively harm the society if he were to run for the highest position in the land, which is the president of the Philippines. Bakit? Because his role in the society is not that of a leader, not that of you know uh, uh, a politician even, but as a sportsman. No, so you get what I mean. It's just things like that. So Plato has that idea of the social construct, as Irish social construct of roles. No, you have, of course, that's derived from a more, shall we say, metaphysical arguments, no, or for example, philosophical anthropological arguments, for those of you who are interested in anthropology, because Plato thinks that the human soul, well, the soul not really in a Christian sense, but soul as in psyche, is divided into three parts. You have the rational, you have the passionate, or the sensitive, and the last one is the appetitive. No, um, but I won't get into that. That would be a long discussion. Maybe one session would need to be devoted for that. But yeah, so Jubilee was also pointing out about the moral context of the answer of Meno, which is again quite important to look at here, especially if you are reading the Meno as a text in itself. But again, my question to you is, we're trying to evaluate the answer of Meno, but not not in terms of what is he saying of virtue, but whether he is saying something useful to the question. I hope that makes sense. um so Nika Joy and Jazer Rose's answer, uh sorry if I'm not, by the way, no, if I'm not uh calling you by your nicknames. I'm still in the process of trying to memorize them. Or if you want to be called by your nickname, you are, free to change your name in Zoom if that's something you're familiar with. Otherwise, I would just default to calling you by by your first names or first name sometimes. So yeah, Nika Joy and Jason Rose's answer captures what basically the question leads to, right? The answer of Meno doesn't satisfy the question because Socrates was asking about the definition of virtue. And when we speak of definition, we speak of something more general, right? And as you can clearly see here, Meno was providing not a definition, no, not the nature of the concept, but rather its manifestations, its instances, right? Uh, Parang pagka tinanong ko kayo, what is a presidential candidate? And then you would tell me, okay, presidential candidate yan, si Leni Robredo, si Calyodi, si Ping Lacson, si Manny Pacquiao, si sino pa ba? Sina Montemayor, Montemayor ba? Tapos si Isko, si well, si of course si Bongbong Marcos and a few more, no? So when I ask you that, and that would be your response, that's understandable. That is what a presidential candidate or who presidential candidates are. But again, they do not fall under the category of the whatness, no? The whatness. In Latin, you call this the quiditas, right? Um, that determines the nature of the concept. Okay, so uh, their answer, for instance, is that uh, the answer of Nika Joy and Jason Rose, for instance, is that um, basically it doesn't capture what is required of the question. I want to say two things about that. That's a perfect way of putting it, and of course, in terms of a practical lesson, this is something that we have to be aware of. Like whenever we are trying to answer a question, especially for example later on, no, in your essays or in your exams or even in your other subjects, especially yung mga major requirement questions, we have to be able to understand what the question requires of us. And here in the context of this dialogue, it could get particularly confusing. Bakit? Again, I don't have the Greek translation with me, or not the Greek translation, but the Greek original with me. But if we look at here, the question of Socrates was highly subjective. What do you yourself say that virtue is? If we look at that and, dala natin yung English baggage natin na what do you think? What do you yourself think? We think immediately that the question seeks our opinion, seeks our subjective opinion, right? But if we eliminate this, because that's understandable, that's part of our English heritage. We tend to think that way. But of course, in Greek, the question would be different. And if I would have time over the weekend, I look for it and I'll show it to you, and then we could do some comparative translations and so on. Um, so it doesn't satisfy the question, even if Socrates was saying you yourself, because Socrates was asking for a definition, and a subjective opinion is a bit more what do you call this, for him. It's something that he wouldn't expect. And don't get me wrong, Meno is not providing here a subjective opinion. No, these are true instances of what a virtue is, but they are instances nonetheless. Okay, they are instances nonetheless. They're not. They do not point to the definition of a virtue. So, okay, let's continue reading. So this is the answer of Socrates, and of course, if you have the chance to right? So the answer of Socrates in response to Menos' answer was this one. Sabi niya, of course, this is a bit sarcastic of Socrates, if you know the character, you know. He says, I seem to be in great luck, Meno. While I am looking for one virtue, I have found you to have a whole swarm of them. That's the first hint. Isa lang ang hinahanap niya, sangkatutak ang binigay ni Meno. Okay? But Meno, to follow up the image of swarms, if I were asking you what is the nature of bees and you said that they are many and of all kinds, what would you answer if I asked you, do you mean that they are many and varied and different from one another insofar as they are bees? Okay, so that's the first question. Do you mean that they are many and varied and different from one another insofar as they are bees? Or are they no different in that regard, but in some other respect, in their beauty, for example, or their size, or in some such other way? Tell me, what would you answer if that's questioned? So the question of Socrates here, the two questions that he poses here are quite complicated. This is where the issue gets complicated. No? In terms of virtue, kung i-apply natin yung logic ng question niya doon sa virtue, ang sinasabi ba ni Meno ay, are there many and different virtues? Different from one another insofar as they are virtues? Or are they no different? Dahil nga tinatawag natin silang virtues, we are able to call them under the collective name virtue, but in some other respect, no, maybe in their beauty or their example, of course, in a different way for virtue, no, maybe in their acceptability, in their reasonability, no. Okay, so the response of men is, I would say that they do not differ from one another in being bees. Kasi yun naman ang notion ng swarm. You have bees of different kinds, of different sizes, right? And so Socrates responds, if I went on to say, tell me, what is this very thing, Meno, in which they're all the same and do not differ from one another? Would you be able to tell me? Okay, so here Socrates clarifies what he is asking for. Okay, what is the very thing in which they are all the same and do not differ from one another? So much so that we could collectively call it virtue. Okay, Meno, of course, says I would. And this is the crux of the discussion. Socrates replies, the same is true in the case of virtues, right? Even if they are many and various, all of them have one and the same form. Okay, remember I mentioned the form a while ago, form which makes them virtues, and it is right to look to this when one is asked to make clear what virtue is. Right? Okay. So do you get what I'm trying to suggest here? Do you get the point of Socrates? Or does anyone have any questions or clarifications at this point?
None so far, sir.
Okay. How about the others? Uh, if you're having, like, maybe because I couldn't see your faces now, so I couldn't assess whether you understand where I'm getting at. But try to imagine a chair, right? We're talking about here form and content, right? If you think about a chair, if you are able to point to me any specific chair, then that's the particular chair, right? But if I would ask you what a chair in itself is, the very form of a chair, that's something quite abstract, right? You get what I mean? That yung pinaka yung chairness, for lack of a better term. I don't like using that example, but it's the one off the top of my head. Like, what makes it a chair, right? In the same way that when you see a dog, like you see a Shih Tzu, a pit bull, a golden retriever, and so on, a Chihuahua, like kung ano-anong mga aso. But you know, every time you see those animals, that what you are seeing is a dog, right? What you're seeing is a dog. You know that. So what is it? What is the very idea? What is the very form of a dog that makes us understand these particular dogs? Of course, in Aristotle, that would be different, but that would be a totally separate discussion. All right. So I hope you get what I mean there. And now, uh, let me share the presentation from last week because this is where we'll be picking up. All right. So the lesson that Socrates through Plato tries to impart here is clear. Right? Even if there are many examples, there is something common among all of them that makes us suggest, okay, that makes us suggest that they fall under one and the same category, right? One and the same category. So when we say that animals are dogs, cats, frogs, elephants, beavers, etc., we have in our minds an idea or a form that allows us to suggest that all of the animals that I have mentioned or all of the aforementioned beings I mentioned belong to one and the same classification. Hence, what we are looking for in the process of inquiring for a definition is not so much the various instances of a term or a concept, but rather its very nature. Okay? So it is important. Bakit tayo nag-detour dito? Because this is important to remember in our attempt to define the social sciences, right? So this is why I find it problematic to begin with a certain set of disciplines, right? Um, Let me check if I have, because I wanted to show you the dep ed syllabus. Hold on. All right, so let me share this one. Right. I don't know. Did any of you take up this subject in senior high school? Sino dito nakapag-take ng subject na ito? DISS, Disciplines and Ideas in the Social Sciences. Kyra is one, okay. Andrew as well. All right. So I haven't really taught this subject. I haven't had the chance to teach in senior high school. I also haven't had this subject before because before in my time wala pa kaming K to 12 and we didn't have these kinds of subjects. So I'm basing off the modules that I've seen, right? And this particular syllabus from DepEd. So for those of you who have taken it, feel free to correct me and tell me later on, sir, that's not completely the case. We studied it so in a very comprehensive, elaborate way and so on, right? But before that, let me make the point I'm trying to make here, which is that uh, I find it problematic to begin with a certain set of principles. Of course, properly or strictly beginning, they don't begin with that. They begin with the definition of the social sciences as the study of society. And I'll get into this maybe a bit later on, um, because art could be a study of society. Art, literature could be a study of society. Philosophy, which is not in the list that you see here, is a study of society. So when you provide a definition that is something that is unique to the term, that is something that what makes us identify the term as not something else. When I try to define water, no, when I try to define water, I understand that the definition of water would not work as it is when I try to define coffee, when I try to define milk, when I try to define juice, when I try to define beer or something. No, it wouldn't work. It shouldn't work because we're trying to find a definition that encapsulates the form of the concept in its utmost generality. So I have a reservation in terms again, and please feel free to interrupt me here. Please feel free to correct me here. But I have a certain reservation about simplistically defining the social sciences as the study of society. What does that mean? Right? If you say that the social sciences is or are the study or sorry, is the study of society, and then you proceed with providing a list of disciplines, the list becomes exclusionary, right? That which is not there doesn't study society. But again, does it make sense? Do you get what I'm trying to suggest here? So DISS, Disciplines and Ideas in the Social Sciences, is offered in the Humanities and Social Sciences track of the K to 12 basic education curriculum for senior high school students in our country. This is the official syllabus from the Department of Education, which begins with a rather vague definition of the social sciences as the study of society. It is from this basic definition that we are supposed to understand the social sciences through the fields of anthropology, economics, geography, history, linguistics, political science, psychology, sociology, and demography. Right? Number one, what what allows us to say, that we can compound sociology and demography. Number two, what is the basis of the list? And what does it mean if you're not part of the list, but you also study society, right? So to be fair, and I want to be fair with my reservations or criticisms. Uh, the subject is called disciplines in and ideas in the social sciences, and of course, I understand they need to be able to talk about disciplines. Because that's what the course title demands. But I merely intend to show the reason why I show this is not to take the piss on it or whatever. But why I intend to show this is because I want us to understand that this method, this style, this structure might be problematic when we do SOCSI 100. Okay, because whether we like to what do you call this, like recognize or realize it or not, we sometimes have the tendency to understand social sciences through this style. We understand social sciences by virtue of the different disciplines associated with it. Okay, so if we suggest that these fields or disciplines make up the social sciences following the definition that was provided, which is the study of society, then what do we make of fields or disciplines such as, and as I've been saying a while ago, philosophy, art, literature, all of which fit the definition. It's study society, but not considered as part of the list, right? What is the basis of the list? Are they not considered social sciences? If so, we have to ask why. What are the criteria for suggesting that particular discipline belongs to this category or does not? If we can answer these questions, then we will surely have no trouble addressing the issue of universality. In other words, if there is a certain standard, then certainly we can have a fixed and universal list of disciplines that would fall under the social sciences. So, the question is this really the case? No, is this really the case? Now, the reason why I asked that is because remember last meeting, no, before we ended our discussion, we talked about uh I asked you basically to look up the social sciences programs in different universities. But before we proceed to that, for those of you who raised their hands earlier and told me that they took the disciplines and ideas in social sciences, how did you find it? Was there a convincing was there a convincing definition of the social sciences? Because I might be basing off just a very, a very isolated case, which is the syllabus and some of the modules I've read about. So how did you find it? Do you still remember how long was it ago? Yeah, Kyra.
Um, Hindi po kasi striking yung lessons during this time kasi we were the lab rats. So parang yung
Okay.
mga
What
parang
do you mean lab rats? Sorry.
kami po
Were you the
kasi,
first batch?
yes po, first batch.
Okay.
So during that time po is yung mga professors or teachers na nagtuturo po sa amin is hindi rin po ito yung field nila. So kumbaga po parang kung ano lang po yung nabigay sa kanila ng modules or like instructions sa kung ano ang ituturo nila. Yun lang po yung nabigay nila and hindi po nabigyan ng justice yung mismong subject itself. Hence, hindi rin po
Mhm.
namin masyado talagang nakapag-dig deeper and kung
Okay.
i-relate po siya sa ngayon, sobrang layo po ng sobrang layo po ng definition sa noon sa ngayon. Kaya medyo confusing po siya. So, ayun po.
Confusing yung what I'm presenting, you mean?
Opo, parang nagtatalo po kasi yung sa nalaman po namin nung SHS nung nag-enter na po kami ng college kasi nga po yung nag-handle sa amin is
Okay.
hindi niya naman po ito field.
All right. And uh, would you be able to tell us, Kyra, what definition of social sciences were you given?
Basically po kung ano po yung nakikita po niya diyan na everything that studies the society, parang ganun po
Okay.
yung nabigay sa amin. So, ayun.
All right. Yes. Thank you, Kyra. I do want to briefly comment on that, but before that, I want to call on Andrew, who raised his hand a while ago.
Same sentiments lang din po with Kyra. It wasn't comprehensive. It's like, well, frankly, it's hard to study social sciences in one term lang. So as far as I could remember back in SHS, what we did was like basically dip our toes in different disciplines, not even all of them. So it's like a little bit of psychology, a little bit of economics, so like the basic definition. And
Mhm.
most of the quizzes or examinations were purely memorization. Some of it siguro application na lang. So it wasn't really as comprehensive as I was expecting. Ayun po, sir.
Yeah. First of all, no, I'm very sorry to hear about your experiences, Kyra and Andrew. I am really saddened by that. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that there is also an institutional problem um, that sustains. There's also an institutional issue that sustains this very problem that you're describing, and that's something that you find. If for those of you who are interested in entering the education sector, that's something that you'll find quite common. When Kyra was mentioning to us that these aren't even the fields of the teachers that are teaching the subject. That's very true. Talamak yan sa napakaraming schools, sometimes even big schools. I remember when I was many many years ago, my very very first teaching job was in a small college. And again, as I've told you, my training is in philosophy. But the philosophy subjects there were being handled by eduk majors. I don't know why. But what was remaining, I was given to teach English and algebra, but I I did not accept algebra, right? I did not accept algebra because like I'd rather not get paid rather than, take it and not be able to teach it because that's not my field. But I've had so many colleagues who experience the same thing. And this is also true because I'm not defending that. I'm not justifying that you weren't able to maximize the semester fully with the subject. But I suppose what I'm saying is that like both teachers and students are sometimes pressured into this sort of problem. Because I've had colleagues before, one of my colleagues, philosophy as well, was given in another college a teaching assignment in algebra, and he says that sometimes he himself finds it difficult to solve the problems that he's writing on the board, right? And that's a very real thing. And sometimes it has to do with the hiring process of the institution. Bakit? If they hire two part-timers. Halimbawa, isang part-timer na magtuturo lang ng X number of subjects, isang magtuturo lang ng X number of subjects, that would be costly as opposed to hiring one full-timer who can teach many different sorts of things. Pero yun na nga because of that, of course, that's driven by the neoliberal capitalist agenda, the exploitation of labor. And I won't get into that too much, but let me just finish off by saying that happens because there are certain powers, certain invisible even powers that govern the institution, the school, the college, the university even, that that makes it do weird stuff, for lack of a better term. And sometimes like students bear the brunt of that sort of problem. Students suffer from that problem, and teachers do suffer as well, right? Because as Kyra was saying, if they were the first, if this was the first time that the subject is being taught, that would be very difficult. No, that would be very difficult because you don't have preceding modules. You don't have content. You have to what do you call this? Come up with content from the ground up, right? And that's very difficult, especially if you are in colleges, in schools, or in universities that pay you by the hour and pay you only when you are delivering lectures, not when you're preparing for the syllabus, not when you're preparing for the content. In the Philippines, that's common. You're not again, for those of you who want to enter the education center, you're not paid for that. No, but that takes time, right? In other countries, for example, you're paid in checking requirements. You're paid in checking papers. You're paid in creating a syllabus. But here but in the Philippines, it's not the case. No, so I'm very sorry to learn your experiences. I hope things will be better for the future generations of those who will be taking this subject, or those who are taking this subject. But I I hope that in spite of that, you will see why I'm trying to drag into this, why it's difficult to define the social sciences. So here you have a list. No, we have here a list of social science disciplines. And because we define the sciences here in the Philippines as the study of society, we then think of these disciplines as the disciplines that study society. But again, my question is that what about other disciplines that don't fall under this? What about other disciplines that are not here, right? Are they not social sciences? So what I want us to look into, and this is something that I've given to you as an informal assignment, and I remember I asked you to look into the um, specific social sciences programs in different universities in the Philippines. And we'll now do that. I'm going to share. So, if you are in your laptop, if you are on your phone, you can simply Google, these programs. But I want us to start with UP Value, right? So the University of the Philippines, Baguio, has a college of. I just realized I did not share the PowerPoint, but anyway, these are just logos of the universities where we will be talking about. Uh, so let's consider first UP Baguio, right? And again, UP Baguio has a College of Social Sciences, right? But a lot of you, I think, are under the BASS program. Tama ba? Right? A lot of you are under the BASS program. My question, I suppose, is that right at the outset, how did you find, or is this something that, like something na lumipas lang, but were you curious enough to ask why is it that you're taking a Bachelor of Arts in the social sciences? How is it that the science a science program is offered under the arts? Right. So that's maybe, a first inquiry, shall we say. Okay. And then you have a College of Social Sciences, and you're which houses the BASS program, following a major minor scheme, which allows students to pursue different areas and combinations of concentrations. That's a good thing that I really like here in UP Baguio, because you have a major minor scheme, which means that you could mix match, so to speak, the modules that you're taking. And that is a very good thing to do, because when I did philosophy in Santo Tomas many years ago, when we say, okay, we'll be taking AB in philosophy, uh we have a fixed curriculum. There's no room for electives, there's no room for other stuff. That halimbawa, gusto ko mag-aral ng isang subject from the Department of History, gusto ko mag-aral ng isang subject from the Department of Sociology. I couldn't do that. I just have to follow the curriculum that is imposed upon me. But the good thing in UP Baguio is that you have the major minor scheme. So you're allowed to, broaden your horizons. Um, so students are free to choose from economics, history, and anthropology for the major program, while they may consider philosophy, political science, psychology, or sociology for their minor area of concentration. So what allows us to classify all of these disciplines as part of the social sciences? 'Di ba? Pagka binalikan natin yung listahan ng DepEd, we have to remember that philosophy is not included there. But here, philosophy is part of the minor programs that you could choose from in the College of Social Sciences. Right? You follow where I'm getting at? So, is this rationale behind this form of categorization the same with or present in other universities? No? In other words, pag sinabi ba nating social sciences, College of Social Sciences, do we see the same thing everywhere? Do we see the same thing in other universities? Okay? Let's take a look at Diliman. Um, so the flagship campus of the system, before its creation of the social sciences, UP Diliman originally had a College of Arts, right? So before the creation of the CSSP, I don't know if you're familiar with that. I don't know if any of you have been in Diliman. For the creation of CSSP, UPD originally had an Arts and Sciences College, but in 1983, this was split into three separate colleges. So the College of Arts and Sciences was split into three. Then you have the College of Science, the College of Arts and Letters, and College of Social Sciences and Philosophy. So we'll devote our attention to CSSP, but again, note that some programs in the arts and letters will be very familiar, right? So CSSP offers a total of 9 undergraduate degree programs. Again, College of Social Sciences and Philosophy. But in the list of DepEd, philosophy is not part of it, right? I suppose philosophy for senior high school will be considered as a humanities subject, which is also justifiable, but it's also an issue that we'll try to address later on. No? What's the difference? What's the distinction between humanities and social sciences, if there is any? Interestingly, so out of the 9 undergrad programs that UP Diliman offers, 7 of these programs are BA degrees, arts degrees, right? Bachelor of Arts, while only 2 under the Bachelor of Science category. Right? Are you familiar with the history of this? The Bachelor of Arts and the Bachelor of Science? No. But Bachelor of Science kasi is a relatively like it's more modern compared to Bachelor of Arts. All ancient degrees before in the medieval setup are arts degrees, right? And some European countries have retained that. That's why here, in other countries rather, it's still possible for you to do a doctor of philosophy in medicine, which is different from an MD. Right? But anyway, um, so 9 programs, 7 of which are from the BA category, Bachelor of Arts category. Right? Of the former, we have anthropology, history, linguistics. Sorry. Sorry about that. The shifting weather conditions can really affect you in many ways. Um, so as I was saying, uh, you have anthropology, history, linguistics, philosophy, pol sci, psychology, and sociology. But again, if you look at the list in DepEd, you don't have linguistics there. So why? Does it mean that DepEd is wrong or UP Diliman is wrong? Or is it because of another thing that I will share with you later? Of the Bachelor of Science, they have geography and psychology. Right? In Ateneo, so we consider the other big university in Quezon City along Katipunan. Interestingly, Ateneo has a School of Social Sciences and School of Humanities. Um, sorry, there's a chat here. Oh, okay. So there's a linguistic list. There is linguistics in the list. All right, thank you for pointing that out. Deo. Right. So yeah, so apparently there is. I stand corrected. Thank you for that. So next we consider the other big university in Quezon City. Um, Interestingly, Ateneo has a School of Social Sciences and School of Humanities. So one of the reasons that I find Ateneo quite interesting is because it's a bit of a deviant, in terms of university setup. It's the only I think it is the only major university in the Philippines that offers different schools, which is a very European, European thing. Um, so it has a School of Social Sciences and it also has a School of Humanities, an SOH. The latter is relevant for reasons which may become clear as we proceed. But to preempt our discussion, I likewise mentioned that the humanities, the liberal arts, and the social sciences often, collide with each other, right? We often find them uh, in different intersections, or we find different intersections in them, rather. we often find programs under the humanities, liberal arts, or social sciences. Under the humanities and liberal arts, which we would commonly associate as well with the social sciences. But we'll return to that later on. So in Ateneo, the School of Social Sciences offers the following programs, and I think I'm sure many of what I will be saying here is not part of the DepEd list, no, in the DISS list from DepEd. So School of Social Sciences in Ateneo, you have Chinese studies, you have communication, you have development studies, you have economics, you have European studies, you have history, you have Japanese studies, you have Korean studies, you have political science, you have psychology, sociology, and anthropology. Right? A lot of those things are not within the list. So does it mean that, again, is Ateneo here wrong to classify them as social sciences, or is the list of DepEd lacking? No. Meanwhile, the School of Humanities offers the following programs. You have AB Literature, AB Panitikang Filipino. AB is same as BA. Right? BA is just a more contemporary usage of the Latin term Artium Baccalaureus, Bachelor of Arts. But older universities tend to keep the AB thing, like Ateneo. UST, when I was still there, still had the AB, but when I left, they were transitioning to the BA because I don't know, probably because of accreditation or rankings or whatever thing that doesn't really have anything to do with scholarly matters, no, such as the title of the degrees. But again, anyway, so you have AB Literature, AB Panitikang Filipino. You have BFA, which is Bachelor of Fine Arts, major in Art Management, BFA, major in Creative Writing, BFA, major in Information Design, BFA, major in Theater Arts, AB Philosophy, Interdisciplinary Studies, Modern Languages, Theology and Ministry program. Okay. So you have, again, from the School of Humanities, you have a couple of disciplines or programs which normally would be in the social sciences, right? Next, we consider DLSU. DLSU has De La Salle University, the one in Taft, Manila, has no College of Social Sciences, but it does have currently a College of Liberal Arts. Right? Originally, DLSU had a College of Arts and Sciences, which was split up in 1982 into one, the College of Liberal Arts, and two, College of Sciences. So CLA, College of Liberal Arts, offers the following programs: Behavioral Science, Communication, Filipino, History, International Studies, Literature, Philosophy, Political Science, Psychology, Theology, and Religious Education. Right? Again, here you find certain disciplines that would be associated with the social sciences but are here now in the liberal arts. Next, we consider Santo Tomas. University of Santo Tomas. It is a little bit more complex in terms of structure because Santo Tomas has the power to grant both ecclesiastical and civil degrees. And I emphasize that because as we've seen in Ateneo and DLSU, you have theology programs integrated in the liberal arts, integrated in humanities. In UST, theology is separate because what you will get in theology is not AB, not a Bachelor of Arts, but an ecclesiastical degree granted by the church. Okay. So we learned that in UST, theology, along with the other sacred sciences, philosophy and canon law, because there's an ecclesiastical version of philosophy. That's not what I took. No, this is usually the philosophy for seminarians and so on. But what I took was the civil degree, Bachelor of Arts, when I was an undergraduate there. So it's part of the ecclesiastical faculties. So you have philosophy, canon law, and theology as part of the ecclesiastical faculties. Like DLSU, UST doesn't have a College of Social Sciences, but it has, however, a Faculty of Arts and Letters. So in arts and letters, it offers 13 AB programs: Asian Studies, Behavioral Science, Communication, Creative Writing, Economics, English Language Studies, History, Journalism, Management, Literature, Philosophy, Political Science, and Sociology. Right. So let the idea sit with you for a moment, and I want you to understand how different the setup is per university. And what does that tell us of the social sciences? Okay. Now, what can we gather from this? First of all, I use these 4 universities or 5 universities as an example, not because of some arbitrary ranking. You know, for better or for worse, I think the culture of ranking universities, especially when you know that the ones ranking you aren't really academics, aren't really those in the scholarly field, sometimes it becomes detrimental to the very idea, to the very nature of the university. But um, incidentally, it is also important not to be swayed by those things when choosing your university. Now, for those of you who might be planning to transfer, choose the university with the best program that you want to take. Not the ranking, not the general ranking, because there are a lot of factors in that, but the best program that that is offered within the country. That's a very important decision, no? Especially if you want to, have a good training in preparation for your field or otherwise. So I chose these 4 universities for the simple reason that they are the biggest universities in the Philippines, and as such, it is understandable that they have more programs to offer. In relation to this, it is important to understand that a university determines what programs it wants to offer. It has to determine what programs it wants to offer. But as per CHED regulations, there are minimum, at least there are certain programs that must be there in order for it to be considered a university. Uh, Right. In relation to this, it is important to understand that a university determines what programs it wants to offer, which is why, insofar as the aforementioned data is concerned, the one that I've presented to you, we are not concerned with disciplines that may or may not be part of the list, but rather why we call them to be part of the social sciences, humanities, or the liberal arts. Do you get what I'm trying to ask? What I'm trying to say here is that right at the outset, we could see that each university has its own classification or categorization. But the question that remains is that what is the rationale behind categorizing those fields or disciplines or programs under the social sciences? What is the rationale behind that? So for one, it's safe to say that there seems to be no universal standard by which we classify disciplines. Many of the disciplines in CSSP are College of Social Sciences and Philosophy in Diliman, are in the Faculty of Arts and Letters of UST. Okay, we cannot begin with a so there is no universal standard by which we classify disciplines. And if you ask why I resorted to using different universities as an example, it is because the emergence of the modern social sciences happened in close association with the radical transformations that took place during during the birth of the modern research university in the early 19th century. And the universities that we have today descended from that modern research university in Germany. But of course, the first universities were from the Middle Ages. So we cannot begin with a convenient list of disciplines, and this is my point. Right? We cannot begin with a convenient list of disciplines as though it points us to something quite significant insofar as the task of definition is concerned. The different classifications that we have seen, however, are by no means arbitrary. Each university has its own reasons for classifying its programs, and we cannot in any way suggest that one is more rational than the other. These classifications are grounded in certain rationales that it would be best to understand them as done for the sake of convenience. Okay? And is by no way indicative of what the social sciences in themselves truly are. So this would not be, this would not be a good basis for determining what social sciences are, because the disciplines in various universities are organized in a way that it would be convenient. No, it was organized for the sake of convenience. Of course, there's a rationality behind it. I'm not saying na arbitrary yun. I'm not saying na random yun, right? But for the most part, it falls under the sake of convenience. Okay? So instead, therefore, of asking what are the social sciences, which tends to lead us, diba? Pag tinanong ka, "Huh, what are the social sciences?" It tends to lead you to enumerating different fields in the social sciences. Instead of doing that, what I want to ask is the singular. What is the social sciences? What is this collective field that we refer to as the social sciences? No? Pag tinanong kasi, what are, madaling mag-enumerate, what are the social sciences? You have geography, you have psychology, you have anthropology, history, etc. But I want to shift the question, not what are the social sciences, but what is? What is this collective field that we refer to as the social sciences? Okay. Do you have any questions so far? Anything that would you would like me to clarify? All right. Okay. How about the others? Okay. So now the question that is within our range is, what is the social sciences? Right? So how do we define the social sciences? Is it distinct from arts and humanities? Or whether these two are the same or not is of course another issue. If it is, how it is different? If the social sciences is distinct from the arts or humanities, how is it different? If it's not distinct, then why is there a difference in terminology? The question that I posed, no, and remember how we try to do this sort of inquiry, right? We problematize something, we arrive at a question, but now that question will lead us to certain problems, right? This is why, incidentally, uh, we teach this interdisciplinarity as a philosophy and history of social sciences, right? So here you get a bit of a glimpse of a philosophical way of addressing problems, of dealing with things. In the course of trying to address this question, it might be helpful for us to change our strategy, right? What I mean there is that, okay, now that we have the question, what is the social sciences, right? There is something elusive. There's something that remains to be defined. Not the collective term social sciences, but the two terms, the two simple terms. social and sciences. You get what I'm saying? Now that's our problem. Kasi before we can understand what the social sciences is, we first have to have an understanding of what the science is. What science is, right? Because the term itself, social sciences, pertains to science qualified with the term social. I'm not providing you a definition, I'm providing you a structure. The term social sciences pertains to the sciences which are by their nature social in their nature and engagement. So paano natin na iintindihin yun? You have on the one hand social as a qualifier and then sciences on the other hand. Which means the core of the question is, what is science? Kasi but if we can define what science is, then we could easily suggest what makes it social or what makes the social sciences social. So to inquire about the origins and emergence of the social sciences means on some level that we have an understanding of what science is. But if I ask you what science is, and then off the top of your head, probably not all of you, but maybe some, and this is a very common thing, no? Off the top of your head, yung immediate na sagot mo, katulad ng, kasi of course when Plato, when Socrates was asking Meno, that was an immediate response, right? So if I ask you immediately, right, what do you think? What do you think science is? And then we are led into the problem that we encountered earlier. Okay, science, that's physics, biology, chemistry. And then we repeat the problem, right? Do you get what I mean? Okay, we're again enumerating, but we're not defining, right? So going over that, what do we mean by science? Now, what do we mean by science? And that would in turn help us understand what makes it social later on. Okay. So how do we understand sciences? How do we understand the sciences? Now, I wasn't able to move forward with the slides, but that's just it. There. What is science? So I hope you've read the Oxford English dictionary entry that I provided you with. It's a bit long. I don't expect you to finish it, but uh I do hope that you've uh dealt with some of its usages here. So we'll examine this for the moment. Here. All right. If you've managed to read this OED entry, you'll find that it has a very comprehensive, treatment of the subject of the concept of science, right? Uh, and it says here that etymologically it originates from the French word, which I'm not going to try and pronounce, science. So there's also a French word um, called science. Okay. Uh, it pertains to the knowledge, understanding, secular knowledge, knowledge derived from experience, study or reflection, acquired skill or ability, or knowledge just granted by God. This is not one definition. These are multiple definitions. Right? This is multiple definition. These are multiple definitions of science, multiple characteristics of science. That's in the 12th century, right? Um, you have the collective body of knowledge in a particular field of sphere. from the 13th century. And from Latin, no, which is the closest that we have, this is actually when we speak of the sciences today, more or less we trace it back to its Latin roots. Okay, knowledge as opposed to belief, understanding, expert knowledge, no, particular branch of knowledge, learning, erudition, etc. Okay, so it's the past participle of sire, to know. Okay, so the reason why this is important is because there are a lot of historical usages of the word. One thing that you have to understand about concepts is that the philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre puts it best. Concepts change as social life changes. Even if it's the same word, even if it's the same concept, it changes its meaning over time. Mas maintindihan nyo to if you deal with MacIntyre, for example, in your ethics class. I don't know if you will or if you had. But for example, he says there that the concept of good, what it means to be good, is very different in the time of ancient Greece than it is today. No? What do we mean when we say someone is good today? But in the ancient Greece, it has very particular meaning. Someone is good when he is able to face his enemies without fear. Something like that. No. So even if it's the same term, it evolves over time. Right? This is from De Formis Spiritu, written by Elfric. So he talks about here of the distinction between science and art. Okay. So again, babalik tayo dun. How is it possible that we have a Bachelor of Arts in social sciences? No? So this distinction is formed by that in ancient Greek, okay, between episteme and techne. Okay, episteme as knowledge, techne as a skill, more or less. Okay, of course, something is always lost in translation there. So it's the distinction between episteme and techne is or resembles a very similar distinction between the Latin terms scientia and ars, science and art. Okay. In the modern use, while French has the term science as well, like the English word, come to be the usual term for those branches of study that deal with a connected body of demonstrated truths or observed facts, systematically classified and more or less comprehended by general laws. The French word continues to have a rather broad application than the English word to knowledge as acquired by study, experience, or reflection. And I will talk about this a bit more later on, but this is true. Both the French and the German have their understanding of science as very broad, as knowledge, right? As body of knowledge. But in English, science has become more or less very specific. No, you have this very strict and specific definition. Just to give you an example, for the sake of context, in German, you have the term Wissenschaft. Wissenschaft, Wissenschaft. And the term Wissenschaft pertains to science. But under the concept of Wissenschaft, you have two types of sciences. Can anyone guess what those types of sciences are under Wissenschaft? Meron ba nakakaalam or would anyone like to take a guess? You have number one, you have Naturwissenschaften, right? Naturwissenschaften meaning natural sciences, and the other one is Geisteswissenschaften, spiritual slash human sciences. So wala silang humanities, meron silang human sciences. So that's a very broad understanding of Germans with the term science, with the term Wissenschaft. All right. Okay. I will end here. We managed to begin with the lecture on science, which is great. But I do wanna continue next meeting. So we'll deal with the readings next week, especially the first part of the read of Copernicus, and as well as the short paper, the art of the social sciences. Right, we'll try to finish everything again next week. But before I end the class, do you have any questions, any clarifications? Because we still have time. We have a good 5 or 4 minutes. So if you have questions, concerns, or clarifications, please feel free to raise it now. Yeah. For those of you who are interested, uh okay, I will send a copy of Meno to all of you. I will send you a copy of that dialogue, and if if you happen to read that, if you enjoyed reading that, find it interesting, I could send you more dialogues from Plato if that's something you're interested in. Um, all right, so I'll take note of that. Okay. Anything else from the others? Okay. So I suppose walk na. I suppose there are no more questions. With that, I would end the recording. Thank you so much for your time and for being here today. Have a very good afternoon and good evening, and see you all again next Thursday. All right. Bye and take care.